Hi guys, I hope you're still there. So I will try to keep it light because it's the end of the day. I'm really honored to be here and talk to you about the projects, the different case studies for particular river restoration. My aim is to inspire the trainees for the case studies that they will develop, in the following days, particularly for rivers. So it's focused on river restoration, this presentation. So I've been working on rivers for like a long time in a way. So this is me at the age of 13 as part of the environmental team in school in Athens. I had the opportunity with a really innovative professor to have funding, special funding from the Greek state, and to be part of an environmental team that was measuring the quality and discussing like ideas and different alternatives for a creek in Athens that's partly covered, partly open. So that was the beginning of my story with rivers a long time ago. And then I studied architecture in Athens, and then I continued. I did a master's in landscape architecture in Austin. And Austin has been really challenged the past years from like droughts and extreme floods. So it was really mind-blowing, my experiences there. And I was introduced to Touriscape, to Dr. Yukongjian during my stay in Austin. And I moved to Beijing and worked in Touriscape because I was totally fascinated with the ability of the office to take a landscape that looks like this and in 2 years to have this image. So that's like completely fascinating. That's literally the same growth of trees, if you see. It's a completely new landscape, and this can be done in a specific context, of course, that is China. I was in Beijing at the time of this flood. I was actually in a club that night of July, and it was totally fascinating that, I went into the club totally dry, and outside this was the situation. It was like completely horrifying. And also living in China, I was totally fascinated by the pattern of urbanization and how this affects the lives of millions and millions of people. Like, for example, Shenzhen in 1979 was a fish village of 30,000 citizens. Today it's 12.5 million, and I have personally designed 3 major projects last year in Shenzhen. They're redeveloping the entire marine waterfront of China, of Shenzhen, creating new cities, etc. So this totally fascinated me, how all this development is totally, does not consider many times the water infrastructure and cities, and literally like the cities turn their backs to the rivers. That is a huge source of life. So at the same time, being in the field of landscape architecture, I know that for a long time there were soil bioengineering solutions in rivers in Germany and in Switzerland and in Austria, that there's a long culture for this. So basically the reason why this whole idea of channelization of rivers started is because in Europe, not only in Europe, but particularly in Europe, the rivers are main transport corridors. And in order to be sure that the transport corridors will always be accessible, they need to have a certain depth in order to allow for boats to always be able to move. And in order to have a certain depth, they needed to be channelized. And this is like an example of, in the past, how rivers used to work. Like actually there were animals like dragging boats that were in the river. And then they were like chain towing in the river. That's like just examples from the river Neckar. This is a typical situation in Europe and in other places, probably the Mississippi, I would assume. And from this point of view of creating like stabilized edges of the river, so we have a stabilized depth and a corridor that always, the water level can be controlled. We ended up with images as we see, like in this photo, like really channelized rivers that are super active traffic corridors. And this perspective transferred this idea of channelization to all rivers in all situations, that this is an ideal solution, because basically this is what hydraulic engineers at the time were able to model, while there's no other base to this. So I will talk about this case study in Kallang River in Singapore that was designed in 2010-2012 by Rumble Studio Dreicycle that I used to work for. I'm not there anymore. So the river, the Kallang River, is one of the main rivers of Singapore, and basically it connects the main reservoir with the sea. And because Singapore has a really huge lack of water resource, they're importing water. It is really important to maintain all water, all fresh water, because desalination is incredibly expensive. And as a result, there's a dam at the end, and the water is kept, like all fresh water is kept on the island, all water that's possible, and then again rotated back, so it's not allowed to go to the sea. The river used to look, as you see in this image, basically there's the river that, the water level of the river that's always there, and then there's always the potential for the flooding during the time of the monsoon. So the whole river is 10 kilometers. The part that was redeveloped was 2 kilometers and was extended for half, so it became 2.5 kilometers. And the whole project costed the mind-blowing of only 45 million euro, which is very few money for the amount of value that it brought to the city. What is fascinating is that this river was approached as completely as a border between the two communities, and there was no way from people of the Bishan community to meet with the Mokyo community. And when the river was opened, was initially named the park Bishan Park, and then the Mokyo community had a really big issue that it only had the name for the An community, so this is why the park is called the Bishan Mokyo Park. So it includes both communities. So basically, as I said, in Singapore we have the situation of extreme floods, these flash floods that we start to see also in Creta the last years. So the normal situation is this, and then suddenly within minutes or hours you can have this amount of water, which can be totally deadly for a city if it's not measured. So the idea, what was done by Robert Dreicycle, at the time the leader was Herbert Dreicycle himself, so basically he approached the community of Singapore, the municipality of Singapore, and explained to them that if they combined the budget for the basically he only had the budget to make a better park. So the idea that he had was to combine the budgets from the river water infrastructure upgrade and the park upgrade to create, to have a bigger fund in order to create a connected river that included, connected park that included the river within it. So he achieved to argue about this after there was, RSD developed a master plan of showing all the types of solutions that could be implemented in Singapore in order to avoid flooding, increase cleansing and quality of water, and identify all the problematic areas and what can be done depending on the situation. And this is the ABC master plan for Singapore. That means active, beautiful, clean, because in Asian cultures beautiful is more important than clean many times, which is fascinating. So basically this created this chart that was the base for a master plan, and there are many projects from there moving forward. So with this base, they convinced in developing the river in an ecological way. So the old canal was broken down, and there was the biggest study of new planting in subtropical climate in order to identify all the bioengineering planting that can sustain being in that situation, like basically stabilizing a river in different kind of conditions. So there was a huge study. The trainers were, the workers were educated in order to implement this. The collaborator of RSD is this guy here, Peter Guides, who is an expert from the Neckar River and has developed many projects I will show you later. So basically they were all trained, all concrete was broken in order to recycle all material that was on site and reuse it as gravel. And then there was a test ridge was created for the study that I mentioned that that doesn't exist anymore. This was only created to see that it's going to work and to identify the planting, and then it was unfortunately destroyed. So we don't have this. But what is important is that they implemented all the bioengineering solutions, and within 6 months, because this is a subtropical climate, it already looked like this. Like this wouldn't be the case, you know, in other climates. But it's totally fascinating how you can have this exactly the same stabilization and all the security of a river that looks has a completely different image. So basically the river was transformed slowly. It was opened, it was like transformed, like stabilized with different solutions in different locations, as you see here. And at the same time it has increased the capacity of the river like massively. And you can see this, after the park opened, there was very soon a monsoon event, so it was directly to be proven that it can work, and of course it could work. And it's really fascinating how it is designed in terms of the level that, the level that it's identified as a safety level. So basically, when the water starts to come, there are sirens, the heavy water. There are sirens that start beeping, and you have, from any point that you're in the park, you can be out in 5 minutes. So it's completely safe. And then this is the image that you have, you know, in a flood situation. And what is totally amazing about this project is that in Singapore, people had no connection with real water, fresh water, because they could only, the only connection they had with water was actually the tap water, because there was no water body that was accessible. And it's literally the first time when this park opened that actually children could touch water and have this interaction, which is unbelievably culturally and socially valuable. And there are so many educational programs like biodiversity, like community programs like that relate to the park. And at the same time, all the biodiversity that came in is completely fascinating. There's a dragonfly survey that's already 3 years after the park was created. I haven't followed up, probably there's a lot more species now. Same for birds. And within a few years, like there was a family of otters, of 5 otters that returned to the park that had left the park already in the 70s. So it's really fascinating that 30, 40 years later, like an otter community, and anybody who's an ecologist in the audience knows that this means a healthy ecosystem that's completely stabilized the moment you have otters. And as I said, considering the life cycle assessment and the offset of any carbon topic that related to this new construction, all the material was kept on site and created this beautiful hill. In this example, there was a competition for the sculpture, and that was really interesting, an interesting landscape created in the end. So you can see, in the past that was just a straight line, and currently this is a completely designed, controlled. There's nothing natural about this river, but it's completely natural, and it's an ecosystem. So continuing on this, basically there's a lot of bibliography that verifies all this study. This is not just, you know, pretty images and trees, etc. And there's a lot of technical drawings that take one from an image of seeing a river like this. And there's really analytic drawings about every stone where it has to be placed for it to work. This is an example from an amphibian tunnel in the Theochari River that I developed as part of RSD a couple of years ago, and it's currently under construction. Actually, the construction has finished of this part. What is fascinating to me is that in these cases, all the materials, when you have to deal with a river, all the materials you need are already on site. Basically, you reuse trees, different parts of the trees, from the roots to the branches, to the trunk, to the trees. Literally every part of existing vegetation that is there is your construction tool. This is our team at the time working on the Theochari River with Peter guides. Definitely there's a need of experts, because if there are no experts. There are very serious mistakes that can be made that can create very difficult situations. For example, this here is a facade that has gone wrong. Like it just ends in nowhere, that creates a stabilization problem. This is a creep wall that is not attached to the soil. This is also a big no-no. This geotextile is completely problematic. It's not flat and the stockings are not really deep. Here the stockings are also not correctly placed. This is a brass mattress that's not based on anything. Basically, these are like looking at drawings of engineering solutions and implementing what you see without actually knowing what it is to implement. The reason why it is important to create these green solutions at the banks of the rivers is because the banks of the rivers have multiple ecosystem services that include the fact that for the fish, it's an area for parking, like basically they rest, they spend some time, they relax because they're constantly moving in a river, and that's really stressful and exhausting. And at the same time, it's an area where they can find food. So basically, since they can chill and they can find food, you know, they create communities, they have babies, and it's really important. So I will show a couple of examples from the work of Theochari. As I said, he's a bioengineering expert and colleague. He has his own company in Stuttgart. This is a really important project, I think, because it shows how a really simple, small solution can be approached in a completely different way. So this is the bank of Neckar, the river in Stuttgart. This is a really tiny spot. And it's just, you know, it's just a concrete lining. Like, so basically, the office had the project, like guides and partners had the project, and basically they wanted to create a better ecology and habitat and open the bank for more possibilities for people, but mostly for biodiversity. And directly what they noticed is that at the location that this bank is at the river, actually the bank is not needed to be so strong. And as a result, the same, exactly the same effect as you can see here can be achieved with green solutions. So basically, there's a series of small groins and that break the water, and underground, like tiny islands that have exactly the same effect to the bank than like a gray, you know, strong solution. So basically, there's all this infrastructure that you see here that's completely hidden. This is the old beton concrete plate that before it was just going out and creating this edge. So basically, the idea is to even break the concrete edge for even 1.5 meters in order to create a new edge that can allow for potential for habitat in the water behind. So basically, these two waters are connected, but they have completely different qualities and values. This water is the water with the standard depth that the boats need in order to cross the Neckar, while here we have a water that is more slow, more controlled, and it's a space for habitat. Another solution in order to have the same effect to break the water is these silt traps, as you see in this example. So in the implementation, the old edge was broken again, and you see that it's totally fascinating that this non-existent, invisible solution basically has the same effect in breaking the water while allowing for habitat to be there. So you can see these technical solutions in these photos. And this is basically the proposal. Before there was just this edge, and now it's a completely connected or yet separated system. It's only connected in the eyes, you know, in our eyes. It's actually two different waters, as I said. So this opens this bank for activities for people, but as I said, it's mostly also for habitat. When we have projects that it's really more urban and more tight, because we always get these questions that, you know, you don't always have the space to have a park next to it, or you don't always have the same climate like Singapore, etc. So when we have a really tough situation as this one, that there is no space, and this is the area for this canal, there are still solutions, engineering solutions for really steep slopes that can still bring a lot of value. As you see, there are different types of brass mattresses, crib walls, stone walls, that help you have exactly the same effect with this park and the same safety of the community in both sides. And open it with really simple ways, just a couple of benches, a small balcony, and this is basically a really simple way to bring value to a project. And then you can see what I find interesting in this photo is that this is a photo, while this is the reality on this side. So basically it's the same perspective of what you can achieve. And I think these small ways are really strong to tell stories of, you know, what nature-based solutions, what value they bring. It's really clear for everybody to understand. Lastly, I would like to say that there's always a question, like in the cases of Greece, that, you know, there's a dry climate, what can we do in this case? You know, we don't have the ability to always have water, etc. So this is an example from California. So basically, river restoration can create a great environment in any situation when you have also very little water. And this is also another example that like a really ugly riprap in a canal was taken out in order to create organized planting that will also completely, all the grey infrastructure, even this tiny like broken riprap in the end was completely disappeared with vegetation in a climate that's really similar to Greece. So these are for me. I've opened the floor to questions. Thank you, guys.
Any questions?
No? Yes.
My question is actually for both of you. You showed really fantastic looking projects, but neither of you mentioned a word about the species that were used there, which is linked to what I was talking about earlier. So can you say a word? It looked like some of the plants or the outcomes have a lot of lawn, for example. Is that considered a part of a nature-based solution?
Lawn,
like in some of the
grasses, the lawn grass.
yeah. So, or other perspectives?
Yeah, of course we are designers, no biologists. But I know that, like in the sand engine, this was a very positive benefit that which was even better than foreseen. That these new species came back and
So basically, in the cases, as I said, in the Pisana Monkey Park, in this case there was an extensive study of local species for this climate, because there was no case study that was done ever historically to know which species is the right one. So basically there are a lot of in the Zalix group, there's a lot of species that are completely different in every situation, in every context. But this is the main, like the willow basically is the main plant for the river restoration, and then it depends on the existing trees, like there's many times the populus in this typology that are cut to smaller pieces, so it's always really case specific, the planting, so what can survive in every situation. So in the NECA, the Peter Geis has done an extensive research, so he knows all the species, and they're all tested and knows exactly which Zalix is the best one. In the Pisan, it was done for this particular project. It has to be checked always. So I think, I don't know if Dimitra, you want to say.
The same thing for us here. You really need to have the experts to try to identify the species that exist there, to know which ones are local, which ones are not. So you will be able, because in the Kiliaris River, where we want to do the restoration, and we're going to do the riparian forest restoration, you have to use the local species to actually create the root density that is going to keep the banks in place.
Yeah, so you need a local expert always. This cannot be done independent.
Yeah, we get the Natural History Museum people to be able to try to do that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to design it.
Alvaro?
In your experience, what is the main motivation for people to want to change the rivers back to something natural? And maybe it's something related, what is, in your opinion, the best argument? You have to choose out of, because there's so many benefits to this, but if you have to choose one that you think would convince decision makers, what would you say?
I think a main argument is the image of the city, to be honest, because once you make such a big change, it completely changes the branding and the identity of an area when you have all this green. And for example, in the case of Singapore, this started as as a pilot project that it's just a strange type of democracy they have, that it's a bit top down. So basically, if you convince the right person, the project is implemented in this case. So basically, this is what happened between RSD and the municipality. And directly when they saw what is actually happening, they changed the entire branding of the country. So this Garden City Singapore and the Green Singapore, everything started from this project. So then once it is going forward, everybody wants to claim that it was their idea. So I think honestly, the branding is a huge force in the end. Because then you are competitive, you bring in money, funding, it's like Copenhagen that Sarah talked about earlier. It's a lot about branding.
Can I
Yes.
add one
Yes.
thing? A lot of the times, a couple of disasters help motivate the local population.
That's a good one, yeah.
Depending on the risk of the disaster that you might have,
You're right.
meaning the terminal risk, meaning how many people they died and so forth, that creates the fear becomes higher that it could happen during their tenure, and this is reason, motivation to try to implement studies of this sort. Yeah.
Exactly.
Tell the rest of the story.
Which story?
Who was the politician in the US, the soil conservation, the soil conservation center in the US?
Oh.
She knows what you are going to tell. Yes.
Well, I was thinking more of a story for flooding here in Greece. I mean, about when was Madra? It was about 2 years ago. We had a major flood outside of Athens.
Yeah.
It was a kind of a crazy storm
Yeah,
that flooded the
Flash flood, yeah.
It flooded the whole mountain, and so all of the problems of drainage, something like 20 people died and so forth. But what Fodini was saying is that a lot of the times you can go back to the Dust Bowl in the U.S. In the 30s. They had this major drought. And the Midwest had a big problem of erosion. The farmers, you might have read the book of Steinbeck, The Grapes of Wrath, about more than 1.5 million people migrated to California and so forth. And so basically something like a huge area in the Midwest, more than 60 centimeters of soil was left. And that was because of bad practices. So the person who was in charge of trying to find a solution, he wanted to pass the Soil Conservation Act in the U.S. And try to start conserving and use agroecological practices to stop soil erosion. So what he did in order to pass the act, he went to the Congress. He knew that the storm was coming in Washington, so he was delaying until the storm was ready. He had people telling him where the storm, and when we were talking about the dust storms, it was like a huge dust storms that were coming by, and he asked the people to open the windows of the Congress place, and basically the storm came in, and that what persuaded them to pass the act. And as soon as they passed the Soil Conservation Act, the soil erosion has decreased significantly to almost pre-industrial times. So I mean, it does take really a bad thing to change the mode of operation of people and politicians from looking from the short term to a little bit longer.
You had a question?
Okay, yes, I just, 2 points. I first wanted to also kind of agree with Susanna. I mean, when I saw some of the examples earlier, especially like Antwerp or others, I was also wondering what's it beyond green, like what is the biodiversity value of some of that and so on, like have we used exotic species, or were they thinking also other benefits like flood protection and so on. But then there was the question about why do we revitalize or restore rivers. So I think from my also experience from Switzerland, which has a long history now of decades of river restoration, also huge investment on river restoration, and I think the main motivation in Switzerland, as I understand it, is really flood protection, right? And the main driver, I mean, it was kind of bubbling under for a long time, and then they had a few major flood events, 80s and 90s, and then that kind of, I think, pushed it for this, or late 90s to change things finally. And now, I mean, obviously, they look into the other benefits as well a lot. I mean, biodiversity value as well, recreation are very important, but the main driver would be flood protection, I think.
Well, that's why the KPIs are very important for monitoring. After, and this is part of the problem that a lot of these studies have been done, but you don't have the monitoring to show the effectiveness. And we hope that a lot of these European demonstration projects are going to be able to do that, to implement and do the post-monitoring. So you actually show the science case as well as the business case of implementing that. So you actually make it technology. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.